We've covered a ton of super techie advanced racket stuff on this channel this year. Now it's time to give a bit of love to the beginner tennis players out there. Hey everybody, it's Luca from Rackets Runners. Now tennis has grown massively over the last few years. We couldn't really travel, so we had to figure out how to have fun at home, and what's more fun than tennis? Okay, to all you beginners out there watching this video, ignore that. Tennis is a fun sport, I promise. Not a rage-inducing sport at all. Not at all. But anyways, yes, there has been a crazy rise in demand for tennis equipment, and it's been most noticeable on the beginner-oriented side of things. It happens all the time. People come into the store, say they tried tennis for the first time, absolutely loved it, and now they want to buy their first real racket. Today, we're going to take a look at the top 5 best rackets for beginners. Now before we go on, as usual, I just wanted to remind everybody that all of the rackets we talk about on this channel you can check out on our website, racketsandrunners.ca, and please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let me know down in the comment section what you want me to cover next. So what exactly is a beginner racket? Because there are a ton of different types of beginners, so how do we actually narrow a list down to 5? The first thing I need to clarify is that we're only talking about top-end rackets here. That means these rackets won't necessarily be geared toward those players who have never stepped on a tennis court in their life and are really just hoping to go out and hit with a friend. These will be more for players who have hit a couple times, really enjoy the sport, and are ready to dedicate a little bit more time and money to a new hobby. I also need to address the elephant in the room that I'm not a beginner, and I can't just magically go play test these rackets as a beginner. But what I can do is objectively analyze all the rackets we carry and try to figure out which ones lend themselves best to beginners. There are a couple bits of criteria that make up a good beginner racket. For one, the racket needs to be light enough to complement a new player's relatively slow swing. The best beginner rackets will fall somewhere between 280 and 295 grams, but some players may want to go a little bit heavier and some a little lighter. Figuring out which weight works best for you is a little bit difficult, but generally taller players want to go for something heavier and vice versa. The reason for that is that taller players have more leverage over the frame, so they can swing something heavier more effectively. Most of the rackets we covered today are going to be right around that 285 gram weight, but another very important characteristic of a good beginner racket is that it's part of a racket line that all have similar playability but at different weight ranges. Now this is important for 2 reasons. For one, if a player demos a 285 gram racket, really likes it but wants, I don't know, more stability for example, there's a really easy option to go to that weighs a little bit more. The second reason why that's important is because beginner rackets aren't necessarily meant to be permanent. You obviously always want to keep improving as a tennis player, and eventually you're probably going to want to make the switch to something heavier. Having a clear next option to work into is one of the most important things to look for when you're picking a beginner racket, and that's part of the reason why the #1 racket on this list has been so good for so long. Okay, I know we're getting a little bit long with the criteria here, and I promise we're going to get into specific rackets in a second, but the last thing that makes a good beginner racket is forgivingness. You want your racket to help you out when you make a mistake, not punish you the way a lot of tougher players' rackets do. You also want a racket that's forgiving on the arm. The tennis swing is a very violent motion, and it can take years to develop the muscles and the technique to withstand less comfortable rackets. Give yourself the best chance to avoid overuse injuries by starting off with a comfortable racket. Okay, we've talked plenty about what makes a good beginner racket. Let's get into the top 5. Coming in at number 5, we have the Head Auxetic Speed Team. Now the Speed Team ticks all of the above criteria. It weighs 285 grams, has a forgiving 100 square inch head size, and a comfortable feel. What really makes the Speed Team a special beginner racket though is that it has a few features that really complement hitting with spin. That's great because when you're learning to play tennis, you want to learn how to play it well, and basically to play tennis well nowadays, you kind of have to hit with spin. The Speed has a semi-aerodynamic beam design that helps it accelerate through contact when you do make that windshield wiper motion, but it's not aerodynamic to the point where it punishes you if you're not swinging the racket like that. The Speed also has a great combination of power and control. Now, usually rackets will prioritize one over the other, and generally beginners will probably want a little bit more power to help them get the ball over the net, but that's not true for everyone. The beam on the Speed is a little bit thinner, which softens up the impact for more control, so if you know you hit with plenty of power and want help reining it in a little bit, it could be perfect. Now, once you do progress to a certain level, the transition out of the Speed Team into the Speed MP is pretty simple. Now, the Speed MP isn't just a Speed Team with 15 more grams, but it does have similar feel, just with maybe a little bit more control, but but still more user-friendly than true control rackets. All right, so coming in at number 4, we've got the Head Gravity MP. Now, I've definitely bent the criteria to the absolute limit with this one, but let me explain why it's so good and which beginner it might work best for. The Gravity MP isn't really like any of the other rackets on this list, so this is for you really gung-ho players, those of you who take massive swings at the ball, swing for the fences, have plenty of power, but really need to work on your control. The Gravity MP is softer, it has a thinner beam and a tighter string pattern than the rest of the rackets on this list. That means it's going to have a lot less free power, but a lot more control. At 295 grams, it's also by far the heaviest racket on this list. Now do be careful with this because that could be a little bit too heavy for a lot of you beginners out there, but for those of you that are going out and just whacking it at the ball uncontrollably, a heavier racket will help slow down your swing, which is also going to help with control. Now what separates the Gravity MP from other tougher control rackets is its forgiving side. Most control rackets are very punishing when you don't make perfect contact, but the Gravity has a pretty big sweet spot that's quite forgiving, so it doesn't punish you nearly as much. Now the best thing about this racket is that you'll never really graduate out of it. Sure, you can move on to the Pro if you want, but the best player at our store plays with the MP. He's just customized it to weigh a little bit more and be a little bit more competitive against advanced players. But again, I really do want to stress, be careful with the Gravity MP. This is going to be the racket that works for the least amount of beginners on this list. You really do need to be a power-oriented player for it to work because it's by far the least forgiving racket here. Okay, so coming in at number 3, we've got the Wilson Clash 100L, and we're firmly back into the super forgiving rackets now. The Clash 100L weighs 280 grams, has a 100 square inch head size, a thick beam, so it has all the ingredients to be user-friendly, but where it separates itself from the other easy rackets is that it's very soft. Historically speaking, forgiving rackets have always been pretty stiff because stiffer rackets are more solid on impact and therefore more stable at a lighter weight. The problem is stiffer rackets tend to be a little bit uncomfortable, and like I mentioned earlier, when you're starting out, you want something comfortable as you're developing proper technique and tennis muscles. Especially for those of you who may have a history of arm discomfort or arm injuries, you won't find a more comfortable line than the Clash line. Every racket in this lineup is the most comfortable one in its weight class, and that's why it's pretty much revolutionized both playability and sales. Beyond that though, the Clash also has a decent amount of spin technology, so kind of like the Speed, although maybe a little bit less than the Speed, it'll complement that style of play. And the other really good thing with the Clash is that making the step up to the 100 is really easy because it's just the exact same racket, 15 grams heavier. All right, so coming in at number 2, you've got the Yonex E-Zone 100L. Now for those of you who like knowing you're holding a quality product, look no further than Yonex rackets. They're still made in-house in Japan with the highest attention to detail and quality control. The E-Zone 100L in particular from Yonex ticks pretty much all those beginner-friendly boxes. It has a 100 square inch head size, a 16 by 19 string pattern, a 285 gram weight, but if it's so beginner-friendly, why do you see so many pros using it? Well, they're not actually using the 100L, but they are using an E-Zone. The E-Zone has a totally unique design that helps give it a fantastic blend of user-friendly power and good control. That's because instead of having a constant beam like the last 3 rackets on this list, it has a thick hoop and a very thin throat. The thick hoop keeps it nice and sturdy on impact to make it more user-friendly and stable, and then the thin throat makes it flex a lot more, which helps with control. Now, developing something this revolutionary was definitely a big leap of faith from Yonex, but suffice to say it's paid off, with players of all levels absolutely loving this design. It's also a very spin-friendly racket. Now, we've been over why that's important, but it's the racket on this list that best complements a spin-friendly style. The throat isn't just thin, it's also shaped aerodynamically, which, like the Speed, helps accelerate the swing speed through contact. The Speed I said was semi-aerodynamic, the E-Zone I'd say is more fully aerodynamic, but still nothing too extreme like the Aero or the Extreme. And again, the step up from the 100L to the 100 is super easy. Everything is pretty much identical with just that racket being 15 grams heavier. Coming in at number 1, and it's a clear number 1, but it's the Pure Drive Team. The Pure Drive line in general absolutely dominates the tennis industry. If you watched our best-selling rackets video from a month back, you know it was also number 1 there. Consistency and pragmatism is what's made the Pure Drive line so successful. That and the fact that it's pretty much the perfect racket for so many different types of players. It's powerful, forgiving, and has a user-friendly X factor to the point where when we send it out for demo with another frame, there's pretty much an 80% chance that the Pure Drive ends up being the one. That consistency I'm referring to is because ever since the Pure Drive line started more than 20 years ago, there has been at least one racket in the line that works for some player at some level. Babolat has never gone too extreme in changing any of the rackets up, instead building on the previous one's success, making slight improvements improvements here and there. For this generation, the main point of emphasis has been comfort. Now, to be so user-friendly and powerful, the Pure Drive has always followed that stiffer is better motto, but to combat those discomfort problems that have come from some of the Pure Drives in the past, Babolat has come up with a very effective dampening technology. It may still not be as comfortable as something like the Clash, but unless you're really worried about arm discomfort or if you've had discomfort issues in the past, the dampening technology is so good that it really won't be a problem. To top it all off, Babolat has a super simple and comprehensive weight tiering system in all their lines, which makes them very easy to navigate. The tours are the heaviest, and then they go down by 15 grams, standard, team, and light, the team being the 285 gram one. Taking a step up or down through the tiers is super simple, so if you demo the wrong one or you want to go heavier as you get better, it's a very easy step to make. So there you have it. Those were the best beginner rackets that we carry. Now obviously there are a number of other options, but if you want to give yourself the best chance to mesh with one, I'm sure one of these will do the trick. Remember that these are beginner rackets. The goal is to progress as a player and eventually go to something more advanced, which is why I really wanted to go for rackets that had a logical step up in the line. Except for maybe the Gravity MP, that one you really don't need to move on from. Just a bit of customization will do the trick, which we have a video for, by the way. But anyways, that is going to be it from us today. Thank you so much for watching. Remember that if you do want to demo any of the rackets we talked about here today, you can come visit us in store or check them out online at racketsandrunners.ca.